Hello there. Let your body relax, loosen your shoulders, and slow your breathing. Gently close your eyes. Outside, the world keeps turning. But here, in this very moment, there is only your breath and the quiet calm slowly spreading through you. Imagine this. You're standing on an endless plain where the morning mist still clings to the earth. Far away, the sun is rising, painting the clouds and the towering ferns in gold. And then, the ground begins to tremble. A shape appears through the veil of mist, slow, steady, so vast that even the air seems to pause. It is Argentinosaurus, the greatest creature ever to walk the earth. Taller than a 10-story building, longer than a city street, and heavier than dozens of elephants combined. Compared to it, even the other giants seem small, like birds beneath the sky. If humankind's greatest monuments are symbols of intellect, then Argentinosaurus is the symbol of nature's grandeur, a living sculpture shaped by wind, stone, and time itself, carrying within it the breath of the planet. Tonight, we will journey back to the distant Cretaceous age to hear the story of this colossal being. A story not just of strength, but of stillness, of slow rhythms, and the quiet beauty of a world long asleep beneath the mist. Let your mind drift with me, and together we'll begin this journey beneath the ancient sky where Argentinosaurus still walks slowly through the first dawn of the earth. When the world was still young and the wind still carried the scent of untouched forests, a vast continent lay bathed in sunlight and silence. The earth was warm. Rivers wound through endless plains, and trees like green towers stretched toward a golden sky. It was a time before humans, before even the idea of words, when the only stories were written by the footsteps of giants. Among those giants lived one so immense that even the ground trembled softly beneath its weight. Argentinosaurus, the gentle titan of the south. It was said that when this creature walked, its shadow could cover a small forest. Its neck reached higher than the tallest araucaria trees, and its body stretched longer than a train of the future could ever dream to be. Yet, for all its size, there was no violence in it, only the slow, steady rhythm of life itself. Argentinosaurus was a herbivore, a creature of peace. Its days were filled with movement and stillness all at once, wandering through the forests of ancient Patagonia, seeking leaves that shimmered in the sun, and lowering its great head to drink from rivers that reflected the sky. It ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each mouthful as though it understood that every leaf was a piece of time. The world around it pulsed with life. Flocks of pterosaurs soared overhead, their wings cutting across the clouds. Herds of smaller dinosaurs, nimble and bright-eyed, darted among the ferns. There were calls and songs, low rumbles, chirps, and the rustling of the wind through colossal trees. It was not chaos, but harmony, each sound belonging exactly where it was. When the evening came, the air cooled. Mist gathered along the riverbanks, and Argentinosaurus would rest, folding its long neck gracefully beside its body. Its heart, vast and patient, beat slowly in the quiet. The stars above shone like cold fire, and sometimes, when the wind blew softly through the valley, it seemed as if the whole earth was breathing in time with the giant's chest. There was no hurry in this world. Seasons changed without announcement. Rain came like gentle music, washing the leaves clean. The sun returned, coaxing green from the ground. In the rhythm of these days, Argentinosaurus lived not as a conqueror, but as a witness, one life among countless others, vast yet humble before the mystery of existence. It was said that its kind could live for centuries. Time did not chase them. It drifted around them like fog around mountains. And so, years passed quietly, tenderly. But the world, even in its peace, was never still. Beneath the soil, the earth stirred. Mountains grew, rivers shifted, forests fell and rose again. Change was the only constant, and even giants could not escape it. One summer, the wind began to carry a new scent, sharp, bitter, unlike the sweetness of the forest. Smoke. Somewhere far away, the land was burning. At first, Argentinosaurus did not understand. It continued its slow journey across the plains, its herds scattered nearby. But the air grew darker each day, and the light of the sun turned red through the haze. Birds screamed as they flew overhead. The wind no longer sang. It howled. Fire came like a tide, fast, unstoppable. Trees that had stood for centuries burst into flame. Animals fled, their cries rising into the smoke. Argentinosaurus moved as quickly as its enormous body would allow, wading through rivers, pushing through the blackened undergrowth. Each step shook ash into the air. For days it walked, without food, without rest, the ground beneath it glowing with embers. And yet, even amid destruction, it did not rage. There was fear, yes, but also something else, a deep, quiet understanding. The land was alive, and sometimes even life needed to burn to begin again. When at last the rain returned, it fell like a blessing. Steam rose from the scorched earth. The fires hissed and died. Argentinosaurus stood beneath the storm, eyes half closed, feeling the water run down its skin like tears. Around it, the forest was gone, nothing but charred stumps and silence. But the silence was not empty. Beneath the ashes, seeds waited. They would rise again someday. And so, the giant began to walk once more, slowly, patiently, through the ruins of what had been. Each step pressed a promise into the soil. Life will return. Days turned into weeks. The herd had scattered. Argentinosaurus was alone now, moving through a landscape that smelled of ash and rain. Its food was scarce, but it found small patches of green new shoots brave enough to grow amid the black. It ate gently, never too much, as though protecting what little life remained. The nights were colder. The stars seemed farther away. Sometimes, in the faint starlight, strange shadows moved across the plain predators, smaller but quick. They followed at a distance, cautious, curious, but they never attacked. Perhaps they too sensed something sacred about this creature, an ancient calm that no hunger could touch. And so the giant lived on, not as a ruler, not as a survivor, but as a witness to rebirth. When spring came again, the first true green returned. Ferns spread, rivers brightened, insects danced over the water. And one morning, as the sun rose over the hills, a faint call echoed in the distance, a familiar, low rumble. Other Argentinosauruses. It turned its head slowly toward the sound. The call came again, rolling like thunder through the valley. And for the first time in many months, the giant felt something stir within its chest, something that might have been joy. It began to move toward the sound, step by step, the earth trembling softly beneath its feet. The wind carried the scent of new leaves. The world was healing. The sun rose slowly over the reborn plains, spilling gold across the damp earth. Dew glistened on the tips of ferns, and the smell of life, rich, clean, and new, drifted through the air. The world was recovering, and so was the giant. Argentinosaurus moved with patient grace through the young forest. Each step was careful, deliberate, as though it feared to harm the fragile sprouts beneath its feet. Around its legs, small dinosaurs darted between roots and stones. Some looked up, curious, before vanishing into the green. The giant's presence seemed to calm them. It carried no threat, only quiet endurance. It fed on the fresh shoots of araucaria and low-hanging branches of cycads, stripping them gently. The taste was vivid bitter at first, then sweet. Each leaf felt alive, full of the earth's renewal. When it swallowed, it was as though it absorbed not just food, but the memory of the rain and the whisper of the soil. By midday, heat shimmered across the land. The rivers, swollen from the storms, ran full and bright. Argentinosaurus lowered its head to drink, the ripples spreading wide. In the reflection of the water, it saw not just itself, but the sky vast and endless, the same blue it had known since its birth. Time seemed to pause in that stillness. Nearby, a group of Saltosaurus grazed, smaller relatives with softer skin and gentler eyes. They moved together, their tails swaying in rhythm. Occasionally, one would glance toward the towering giant, as though reassured by its calm presence. Argentinosaurus was no longer alone. Life, as always, had found its way back. Afternoons were quiet. The air buzzed with insects, their wings glinting like fragments of sunlight. Far above, pterosaurs circled lazily, riding the thermals. From a nearby grove came the distant cry of a Carnotaurus, sharp and echoing through the hills. But even that fierce call faded into peace. The balance of life had returned, fragile but real. Argentinosaurus walked through it all like a slow-moving mountain, a creature out of time. Its massive tail brushed the tops of ferns. Its breath rose in visible clouds. Sometimes it would stop, stand utterly still, and simply listen. The wind, the water, the faint pulse of the earth. It seemed to understand that all of these sounds were part of one song, ancient and unending. At night, when the temperature dropped and the sky filled with stars, the giant found a gentle slope near the river. There it lay down carefully, curling its long neck across the grass. Fireflies drifted around its face like tiny lanterns. The air smelled of wet moss and stone. It closed its eyes, breathing slowly, each exhale a soft mist in the moonlight. Dreams came, not like the dreams of men, full of faces and words, but deep, formless memories, the warmth of sunlight, the feel of soil beneath its feet, the call of distant kin. In that twilight between waking and sleep, it was part of everything. The river, the wind, the starlight, the pulse of the living planet. When morning returned, it rose again, steady and unhurried. Days blended together, marked only by the color of the sky and the songs of unseen creatures. It followed the river southward, drawn not by need, but by instinct, as though something deep within it remembered a place it had once known. The journey took it across wide plains and rocky ridges. It saw flocks of pterosaurs nesting along cliffs, their wings flashing silver in the light. It passed through valleys filled with flowers that opened only at dusk. It heard the low rumble of distant volcanoes, their breath rising in thin trails of smoke. And everywhere, beneath everything, Was the slow heartbeat of the earth steady, patient, alive? Sometimes storms came without warning. The wind would howl and sheets of rain would fall so thick the world turned white. Argentinosaurus would stand still through it all, eyes half closed, water running down its massive sides. It did not fight the storm, it simply waited. When the skies cleared, it would drink from the puddles, the water cool and sweet, and move on. Seasons shifted, the forest thickened, the young shoots grew into trees tall enough to brush its flanks. Life multiplied in every corner. New species, new colors, new sounds. The land that had once burned was now alive beyond measure. But age, gentle and certain, was settling into the giant's bones. Its steps grew slower. The distances it traveled shortened. Yet there was no fear in its heart. Life had given it everything: sunlight, water, food, companionship, and the quiet grace of time. That was enough. One evening, it reached a vast plain covered in golden grass. The horizon stretched in every direction, infinite and silent. The sky burned orange with sunset. Argentinosaurus stopped there, letting the wind move through the tall grass like a sea. In that moment, it remembered the migration routes of its youth, the herds that once moved beside it, the songs that echoed across the valleys. Some of those memories felt like dreams now, soft, far away, but they brought no sadness, only peace. A flock of small birds passed overhead, their wings glittering in the fading light. They circled once, then vanished toward the trees. Argentinosaurus lifted its head slightly, following their flight until the last speck disappeared. It exhaled a long, low breath, as if to say farewell to the day. Then it turned toward the river again, where the water caught the last light of the sun. Its reflection shimmered massive, ancient, serene. The world was older now, but still beautiful. And though the giant had changed, it was still part of that beauty. Each breath, each step, each heartbeat was a quiet offering to the land that had raised it. As night fell, the stars returned, countless and bright. The moon rose slow and full, casting a silver glow across the plain. Argentinosaurus stood still for a long time, its shadow stretching across the grass like a mountain in the dark. And then, with the patience of the ages, it began to move again toward the whispering trees, toward the sound of water, toward the endless rhythm of the earth. The river curved through the land like a silver ribbon, winding between hills draped in mist. Along its banks, new forests had begun to rise, young araucaria trees and ferns unfurling delicate fronds in the morning light. The air was thick with the hum of insects, the calls of unseen birds, and the distant cries of other giants moving across the plains. Life was once again abundant, and Argentinosaurus walked among it like a quiet guardian. Each day began with the slow warmth of dawn. The first rays of sunlight would touch the horizon, spreading gold through the thin veil of fog. Argentinosaurus would lift its head, breathing in the scent of wet leaves and fertile soil. Its massive body shimmered with dew. The sound of its breath mingled with the rhythm of the world awakening around it, a rhythm it had always known and always trusted. Food was plentiful now. It fed on the tops of tall trees, reaching with its long neck to strip clusters of fresh leaves. The flavor changed with the seasons, some bitter, some sweet, some filled with a resinous scent that lingered in its mouth. It did not eat out of hunger alone, but out of instinct, partaking in the eternal exchange between creature and earth. Every mouthful was both an ending and a beginning. At times, smaller dinosaurs followed in its wake, feeding on the low plants trampled beneath its steps. A pair of Hypsilophodon lingered near, their tiny forms darting in and out of the grass. They seemed fearless, almost playful, as if they understood that the giant meant them no harm. Even predators, the sharp-toothed Abelisaurus and Carnotaurus, kept their distance. The immense size of Argentinosaurus commanded respect, but more than that, there was something sacred in its presence, a sense of calm that even the fiercest beasts could feel. The days were long and filled with light. Rain came and went, drenching the land, turning the soil dark and fragrant. When the storms passed, rainbows arched across the sky. Argentinosaurus would sometimes stand still for hours, watching the colors shimmer above the trees. Perhaps it did not understand them, but it seemed to feel their beauty. In the evenings, the giant would find shelter beneath a hill or among tall trees. The forest glowed with fireflies, the air cool and full of whispers. It would settle its enormous body slowly, folding its legs beneath itself, lowering its neck until its head rested near the ground. In those moments, the world felt timeless. The stars overhead burned with the same cold fire that had watched over its birth, and they would continue to shine long after its last breath. Time to the giant was not something to fear. It was simply the river in which all life drifted. Sometimes, far away, the mountains rumbled. The earth itself shifted, slow but unstoppable. Smoke rose from unseen craters. Yet none of this disturbed Argentinosaurus. It had lived long enough to know that even the trembling of the ground was part of the world's breathing. The land changed, always. So did life. But change was not the same as loss. The herd had returned smaller now, but alive. They moved through the forest together, a procession of giants. The ground quivered beneath their steps, but the rhythm was steady, almost musical. The young among them still small by comparison, though each the size of a house kept close to the elders, mimicking their slow, deliberate motions. Argentinosaurus walked at the center, neither leading nor following, simply part of the whole. When the heat of the day became too heavy, they sought shade beside wide lakes. There, the surface of the water shimmered with floating plants and drifting pollen. Fish darted beneath the reflection of the sky. Sometimes Argentinosaurus would wade in until the water reached its belly, the coolness easing its weary limbs. The younger ones splashed clumsily, sending waves across the lake. The sound of their play carried through the air, soft and joyful. The nights that followed were calm. The air smelled of moss and rain. From the shadows, nocturnal creatures called out strange croaks, clicks, and distant trills that filled the darkness like music. The herd slept standing or lying close together, their breathing deep and synchronized, like the sound of the sea. Above them, the constellations shifted slowly, patterns the world itself had painted. As years passed, the seasons grew more distinct. The dry season brought heat that shimmered across the plains, and water grew scarce. Argentinosaurus traveled farther during those months, following the river downstream toward greener valleys. Along the way, it encountered other species flocks of feathered raptors that stalked the grasslands, herds of armored ankylosaurs that grazed silently under the sun. Each creature, in its own way, belonged to the tapestry of the world. Sometimes it would pause on a hilltop and look out across the endless expanse, the silver rivers, the golden plains, the blue horizon. The wind would move through its scales, carrying the scent of faraway rain. In those moments, it felt the vastness of everything, the deep stillness of time, the unspoken connection between every living thing. It was both immense and small, eternal and fleeting. There were moments of hardship too, storms that tore through the land with violent winds, droughts that cracked the soil. Even the mighty had to bow to the will of nature. Yet Argentinosaurus never resisted. It endured, quietly as it always had. It found shade where there was shade, water where there was water, and when neither could be found, it simply stood beneath the sky, waiting. Waiting was part of its wisdom. One evening, during the heart of a long drought, it came upon a dying forest. The trees were pale, their leaves shriveled and falling like ash. The air was hot and dry. No birds sang. Argentinosaurus stepped slowly among the brittle trunks, the ground crunching beneath its feet. But in the center of that withered place, a small patch of green remained a cluster of young shoots, fragile but alive. It lowered its great head and, instead of eating them, it brushed them gently with its snout, as though in blessing. Days later, rain returned. The first drops fell like silver beads on stone. The giant stood beneath the storm, letting the water soak its skin, feeling the dust wash away. The smell of wet earth rose again, rich and full of promise. And from the places where the shoots had survived, new growth began to spread. Time continued its endless circle. The young in the herd grew tall. The forests thickened. The world turned and turned. Argentinosaurus moved more slowly now, its body heavy with age, but its eyes, deep, dark and gentle, still held the reflection of the sky. Every sunrise was a gift, every night a soft closing of the day. It had seen fire and rain, death and birth, endings and beginnings. It had known loneliness and companionship, silence and song. And through it all, one truth remained. The world was vast, but never empty. Even in loss, there was always something new waiting to grow. So it walked on, one step at a time, leaving deep impressions in the soil that would outlast its bones. Each footprint, a quiet echo of existence. The seasons rolled gently across the land, one folding into another like waves meeting the shore. Time no longer felt like something that passed. It was simply something that was. The herds that once followed Argentinosaurus had grown and moved on. New generations wandered the plains now strong, curious, unafraid. The giant, older and slower, stayed behind in the valley where the river bent wide and calm. It was a good place, full of food and shade, with a wind that smelled of green things. Its body bore the weight of years. The once smooth skin along its sides had grown rough, thick like bark. Its tail no longer swayed with youthful rhythm, but moved like a slow pendulum, steady and sure. Each step was careful, each breath deliberate. Yet in its eyes, there was still light, soft, warm, and endlessly patient. Every morning, it woke before the sun rose. Mist hovered above the water, curling through the ferns like white smoke. It would stand there, half in the river, letting the current wash against its legs. Fish darted between its feet, unafraid. Birds nested in the trees that leaned over the shore. The world moved gently around it, and it moved gently within the world. When the sun rose, the light turned the mist gold. The air shimmered, the sound of the forest waking, chirps, calls, rustles, rose like a distant choir. Argentinosaurus would lower its head and eat slowly, pulling leaves from the branches that hung low over the water. Each motion was unhurried, almost ceremonial. There was no rush, no hunger, no fear. It had learned after so many seasons that nothing was permanent. Not the forest, not the fire, not the body. And so, every moment was enough. Sometimes, younger Saltosaurus herds passed through the valley. They would stop when they saw it, hesitant at first, then curious. They could sense its age, the calm that radiated from its stillness. A few brave ones would approach, their long necks stretching forward, nostrils flaring as they inhaled the scent of a life far older than theirs. Argentinosaurus would lower its head slightly, acknowledging them. No words, no gestures, just presence. And then they would move on, leaving deep tracks beside its own. After they were gone, the valley returned to silence. The river whispered, and the wind sighed through the tall grass. The days were long, but never lonely. Insects buzzed in the heat, dragonflies with wings like colored glass. The air trembled with life. And every afternoon, clouds gathered above the hills, heavy with rain. When the storm came, Argentinosaurus would simply stand still, letting the water pour over its body. The drops drummed against its back like soft music, and thunder rolled in the distance like the slow heartbeat of the world. Afterward, the forest would glisten. The scent of wet soil filled the air. Steam rose in pale tendrils from the ground. Everything shimmered with renewal. Argentinosaurus would drink deeply from puddles and rivers alike, its reflection broken by the ripples of the falling rain. The sight was simple, but beautiful, an ancient creature, still and vast, surrounded by the endless motion of the living world. At night, it would lie beside the water and look at the stars. They seemed closer now, brighter, sharper against the dark. Some nights, meteors crossed the sky, thin white streaks burning and fading in silence. It did not know what those falling lights meant, but it felt something stir deep within it whenever one appeared. Perhaps it remembered the fire that once swept the land, or the rain that followed after. Perhaps it simply recognized change when it saw it. There was a rhythm to everything, the rise and fall of seasons, of stars, of breaths. Even for something as old and vast as Argentinosaurus, there would come a time when the rhythm slowed. One morning, the wind changed. It was colder, carrying a crispness that had not been there before. The forest's leaves had begun to fade, their edges yellowing. The air smelled faintly of dry bark and dust. Argentinosaurus moved slower now. Each movement was an effort, but there was no struggle in it, only the acceptance that all things, even mountains, eventually bow to time. The herd no longer visited. The river had grown narrower, its song quieter. The world was shifting again, as it always did. But in the midst of that change, the giant remained anchored, unshaken. It spent its days beneath the same tall trees it had once eaten from as a youth. Their branches had thickened and reached higher, their roots winding deep into the earth. Some of those trees had grown from seeds dropped long ago by its own feeding. It had given the forest shape without even knowing it. And now, the forest gave back shade, shelter, and song. Birds perched on its back while it rested. Tiny lizards basked along its sides, soaking up the warmth of the sun. Even the insects seemed gentler around it, as though aware they were near something sacred. Time had softened everything. The sunsets grew longer that season. The sky turned shades of red and violet, and the horizon glowed until the first stars appeared. Argentinosaurus would lift its head, watching the light fade, feeling the air cool against its skin. Sometimes the wind carried distant calls, the voices of others, faint and far away. Perhaps echoes of its kind, or perhaps only the memory of them carried through the air. It answered once or twice, a deep, low sound that rolled across the valley like thunder. Then, silence again. In that silence, there was no sadness, only peace. One night, the moon rose full and silver, painting the world in soft light. The forest gleamed, every leaf and blade of grass touched with pale glow. Argentinosaurus stood by the river, its reflection stretching across the water like a ghost. The air was cool. The stars shimmered in the ripples. It breathed in deeply, slow, calm, endless. There was no pain, only heaviness. No fear, only quiet. It felt the pulse of the earth beneath its feet, faint but steady, the same rhythm it had known since birth. It understood then, in its wordless way, that the rhythm would continue even without it. And that was enough. It lowered its head to drink one last time, the water cool and sweet. Then it turned toward the field where the grass was tallest, where the wind moved like waves. Step by step, it walked until it found a small rise overlooking the valley. The sky above was vast. The river below shone like a thread of silver. Argentinosaurus stood there for a long while, letting the night wrap around it. Then, slowly, gently, it lay down. The ground welcomed its weight like an old friend. The wind quieted. The forest stilled. Even the river seemed to hush. The giant exhaled, long and soft, as if the earth itself sighed with it. The breath lingered in the cool air. Then it faded, and the valley returned to silence. But silence was not the end. By morning, the first light touched the field. Dew glistened where its great body had lain. Grass swayed in the breeze. Birds sang softly from the trees. And beneath the soil, seeds stirred. Life once again began to rise. The morning after the giant's passing was unlike any other. The valley, wrapped in mist, seemed to hold its breath. The river flowed as it always had, yet its song was softer, slower, as if in reverence. Above, the sky stretched wide and pale, streaked with ribbons of light that shimmered faintly like the scales of a sleeping dragon. Time moved differently in that place. Days passed quietly, the air heavy with memory. Rain fell, and the earth absorbed it. The wind whispered through the grass, tracing the outline of the massive form that once stood there. Where its body had rested, the soil grew dark and rich. Life began to stir, tender and new. The first green shoots appeared within weeks, tiny ferns pushing up through the softened ground. Then moss spread, painting the earth in emerald. Wild flowers followed, their petals opening shyly to the sun. The valley, once marked by the weight of the largest creature to ever walk the earth, was now reborn as a cradle of colour and scent. From the forest edge, smaller creatures ventured forth. Tiny mammals with bright eyes and quick movements. Feathered dinosaurs that flitted from branch to branch, their plumage catching the morning light. None of them knew the giant that had come before them. Yet somehow they sensed its presence in the stillness, in the richness of the soil, in the peace that hung over everything. Seasons changed. The rains came and went. Trees grew taller, their roots digging deep into the earth, drinking from the same veins of water that had once nourished the Argentinosaurus. Their trunks thickened, their leaves spread wide, shading the ground where wild orchids now bloomed. The valley became a sanctuary, a place where the living thrived in quiet harmony. And though the giant's bones rested far below, hidden from sight, its essence lingered in the pulse of the land. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. The river changed its course slightly, curving closer to the rise where the giant had lain. Over time, its waters washed gently against the stone like remains buried deep within. Sediment covered them, layer after layer, until they became part of the earth itself. The world above remained unaware. Forests came and went. Mountains rose and wore down. Ice crept across the land and retreated again. But always, somewhere in the quiet heart of the continent, the spirit of Argentinosaurus endured wordless, timeless, woven into the rhythm of creation itself. One morning, long after the last of its kind had vanished, a different sun rose over the valley. The air was cooler now, the trees strange and new. The land was alive with unfamiliar sounds. Birds with songs unlike any before, insects with glassy wings, mammals that moved swiftly through the underbrush. The age of the giants was gone, but life, as always, had continued. In a distant age, long beyond memory, the earth shifted once more. The rocks cracked, the hills eroded, and the river carved new paths through the valley. Beneath those layers of stone, something ancient began to emerge. Fossils. What had once been bone was now stone perfect, silent, enduring. The curve of a rib, the sweep of a vertebra, the delicate shape of a footprint pressed into hardened mud. Each fragment told a story older than language, older than thought itself. And though no living creature could understand, the earth remembered. The winds carried dust from the valley across oceans and deserts, scattering the essence of that ancient life to every corner of the world. And in some quiet, eternal way, the Argentinosaurus lived on, not as flesh and breath, but as memory written into the bones of the planet. Ages later, so long that the stars themselves had shifted, a new kind of creature arrived. Small, upright, curious. They called themselves humans. They walked through the valley, marveling at the vast stones that broke the surface of the earth. They brushed the soil from them, carefully, reverently. And when they found the long, graceful arc of a fossilized bone, they stopped. They looked up at the sky, then back down at what they had uncovered. In that moment, they felt something they could not name, a quiet awe, a humbling recognition of the ancient life that had come before them. They gave it a name, Argentinosaurus. The name carried through the air across time like a whisper returned from the past. And though the giant itself was gone, something stirred in that ancient earth, a faint echo, a vibration, as if the memory of its breath had awakened. From that day on, the story spread. Drawings, bones, words, pieces of the past, reassembled by curious minds. Scientists studied, children imagined, artists painted the long-necked titan moving through jungles of fern and mist. Each retelling was an act of remembrance, a way of keeping something vast and gentle alive within the human heart. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the soil, beneath roots and rock, the world itself listened and remembered. The valley, now green again, slept under starlight. The same stars that had once shone on the Argentinosaurus still glittered above, unchanged, eternal. The wind moved softly through the grass, carrying the scent of life, fresh, warm, infinite. The river sang as it always had, its song weaving through time. And if one stood there quietly, just at the edge of night, and closed their eyes, they might hear it, the deep, slow heartbeat of the earth. In that rhythm, if you listened long enough, you could almost feel the presence of something vast and kind, a memory, a spirit, a whisper of the giant who once walked there. Not gone, only resting, only waiting in the folds of time, where every ending is a beginning. And in that stillness, the world dreamed again.